Welcome. Really appreciate all of you spending your evening with us tonight. Our conversation is called The Promise of the Connected Car, What It Can Be, and Who Can Win. We're privileged to have with us four distinguished speakers, starting with Rob Csongor of NVIDIA, Johan Jungwirth of Mercedes-Benz R&D North America, Jim Misener of Transportation Technology Ventures, also a consultant, and Maarten Sierhuis of Nissan Research Center, Silicon Valley, and of course, our moderator, Jaime Butters of Bloomberg News. Thank you all, and we really appreciate you being here as well. And we would also like to thank our sponsors, Bloomberg News and NVIDIA, for making this event possible. A couple of people that I'd like to call out for their exceptional help in putting this program together. And the first is Jaime Butters. Thank you, Jaime. We could not have done this without you. Pleasure. And the second is Tracy Perry of Airfoil Group. Really appreciate your help.
Where's Tracy? Where's Tracy? I need to meet her.
A word about Churchill Club, an independent, nonprofit technology and business forum, founded in 1985, just about the time that Windows 1.0 was hitting the scene. Our mission is to encourage innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. And we do this through the up to 40 programs that we present each year where like minds, such as you in the room tonight, can connect with one another and with fresh ideas. And we do respectfully ask our speakers not to pitch, to leave their corporate messaging at the door, and instead to think of themselves as independent thought leaders with all of the knowledge that they come with from their professional affiliations to contribute to the common good. We are especially excited about the diverse perspectives and views that our speakers are going to share with us tonight. Please consider joining us on August 21 for Mobile Moments, the new battleground for customers. And on September 25th, it's the Churchills, an amazing and inspiring program that highlights excellence in four key areas: innovation, social good, leadership, and collaboration. And we definitely encourage you to come to that. The three awards that we can announce so far: the global benefactor is Malala Yousafzai. The legendary leader is Paul Jacobs of Qualcomm. And the game changer is Airbnb. And we have one more to announce, but that'll happen soon. If you'd like to consider joining us or supporting in some way that would be meaningful to you, please know that we would appreciate that very much. Learn more about us at churchillclub.org. If you're tweeting, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you'll find other Twitter codes in the program on your tables. And then finally, I want to point out that we have an incredible audience here tonight with many leaders from the connected car ecosystem. So we hope that you will ask for the microphone and contribute to the conversation during Q&A. Our moderator, Jaime Butters, first fell in love with cars when he was 7 years old and he attended the Indy 500. Now he's based in Detroit and he's covered the auto industry for over 15 years. For the past 6 of those, he has been with Bloomberg News, and he leads the team for U.S. transportation there. We certainly appreciate the great lengths that he took to be with us tonight. Please give your warmest welcome to our moderator, Jaime Butters.
Thank you. Thanks. Glad to be here. Really fun to come back to this area, down truly in the heart of Silicon Valley. So we're talking about connected cars. Let's first have some definition talk. Maarten, can you start us off? How should we, at least for the next hour and a half, we can change it after this, but for the next hour and a half, how should we define connectivity? What is it? What is the point?
Wow, why you pick on me? So for me, connectivity is many different things. It's obviously when we talk about connectivity, we all think about the internet. So that's far and foremost one of the, of course, ways to communicate from the car out to the rest of the world. But for me, it's also connectivity within the car. And being at a research center, we have to think more broadly than just thinking about Pandora or Facebook in the car. That to me is not so interesting from a research point of view. What is interesting is to understand what a network in the car is about, just like a network in your home. What connectivity between other cars is about, what connectivity between your car and the infrastructure is about. And the way I don't come from the car industry. I come from space exploration. I spent more than a decade thinking about how it would mean to live and work on Mars. So for me, the car is like a spacesuit. When I worked with astronauts at NASA, they said, my spacesuit is three things. It's my work environment, it's my life support system, and it's my home. Don't with it. Right? So that's how I look at the car as well. I mean, I need to be connected in order to be doing what I need to do in the car.
So, Jim, what can we expect as consumers to benefit from this connectivity? What is it going to mean to the 100 million people around the world buying a car in 10 years?
Certainly the prospect of personal mobility as manifested in the car or your transportation mode would be one, because then it's accessibility to the world. But from a social good perspective, and oftentimes as consumers we don't think that, but en masse we should, there's the benefits to sustainability, to mobility, and to safety that connectivity can afford you in different forms.
How do we get a sustainability benefit from connectivity?
Well, there are very automated vehicle-centric ways of thinking about it, which is car to car. You like the Indy 500. Mm-hmm. You can draft with connectivity if it's done in a highly reliable, high quality of service, low latency way, which is a very extreme idea of connectivity. Mm-hmm. But on a more near to earth, short-term example, think about navigation aids. Mm-hmm. In fact, I got here by avoiding traffic jams and driving smooth by being connected to traffic. So it spans the gamut.
Yeah, I wish my navigation had helped me avoid the traffic. I should have found a different route.
Well, I have a smartphone. It's just part of that connectivity equation.
You're right. So, so JJ, what about innovators? I'm sure we have several here in the room. What should they be bringing to the table? What can they hope for from this mobile playground?
Yes. Actually, I think it's a lot, and there are many, many different aspects where innovation will happen in this connected car connectivity space. And I think in the last 10 years, we focused on kind of bringing the internet into the car and connecting the car with smartphones and so on. But now the next step is really to bring the car into the internet. And what does that mean? If the car now becomes a node, in this Internet of Things, in the Internet of Everything. Now think of this space, of the car really becoming intelligent, being able to potentially even make decisions, being connected to your home, to yourself, being really a node, in this connected life. In my opinion, there is so much room for innovation, not just within the vehicle, but actually within the space around it. If you think about all these, layers of digital information around us, which we can make visible in the car, by using windshields and windows as augmented reality displays, and a lot more.
Yep. All right. So, Rob, your company invents reality all the time for people playing video games. What about in their car? How does that play out there?
Well, I think when we look at video games, we look at it as one of the most demanding computing audiences in the world. Mm-hmm. To reproduce reality in a video game takes a staggering amount of technology. That's why the GPUs we make are actually the largest pieces of silicon on the planet. It turns out that there are similar computing problems that can use that architecture, and within the automobile, it's not just graphics, but it's compute applications. So computer vision is essentially think of it as the reverse of graphics. Instead of painting pixels, you're sucking in, from the outside world and then processing the imagery. So when I think of the connected car, it's an umbrella term. It kind of encompasses a lot of different things. But one of the major challenges we think for this connected car, whenever people talk about it and they mention casually, that this car will do this, it'll recognize pedestrians, it'll do machine learning, it'll do all these things. In our mind, we're just going, this is now a supercomputer. I mean, this is a computer the size of a basketball court that somehow has to fit into this car, and how are we going to do that? So I think there's a lot of promise, because you can take a lot of this technology, put it in a data center, right? Imagine having machine learning in a data center, and it's connected to the car. The car is doing some of the processing, the data center is doing the other processing, and what you have is an extremely powerful supercomputer at work, and it's working, in a connected way with the vehicle.
All right. So many of us, when we think about connected cars, we think about autonomous driving and autonomous cars. And not long ago, Churchill Club had a great conversation that spent a lot of time on autonomous cars, and we don't want to get sucked into that too much. But there is a relationship. So Maarten, can you help spell out for us, how are they different and how are they similar? What's the interplay or the non-interplay between connectivity and autonomy?
Well, I think if you think about autonomous technology for driving, we don't need necessarily connectivity in order to build autonomous vehicles. As a matter of fact, we better make sure that we can drive autonomously when we don't have connectivity. Otherwise, there are many places where you probably won't be able to drive. Now, so that being said, there is, of course, networking that we need in the car in order to build an autonomous vehicle. So when you talk about connectivity, I need to have connectivity in the car itself. And you can think about that as a network and a connection to the rest of the car. But leaving that alone, I think connectivity to the cloud, to other cars, will sometimes make the problem easier. But would also provide, in the long run, services, and this is what I think connected car is about, is understanding and thinking about what are the services that we can provide when you no longer have to be just occupied with driving the vehicle. And that, I think, is a space where we can explore, and you can make the connection between the connected car and a mobile phone. But I think that connection, that similarity soon breaks when you think about the car being a phone that you're inside of. That is a profoundly different kind of device. And it speaks to my analogy, I think, with a spacesuit and an astronaut. And I think if you now think about safety, if you think about entertainment, we can go into many different discussions and areas to explore. Mm-hmm. And that's exciting. Mm-hmm. That's just wonderful.
So, JJ, is that how they see it at Mercedes as well, or is there any difference in approach there?
I think there are some differences in the sense, especially focusing around, connectivity and autonomous driving kind of belonging together, and actually even using like the cloud, using real-time information about not just traffic, but maybe construction zones, maybe really basically you would call it maybe an HD map or a high-definition map, which has much more information than the maps of today, and even self-learning map, which learns over time continuously, and where you get kind of a release or an okay, let's say, for the route to go from A to B, and maybe each morning when you take you have your autonomous drive or autonomous car actually drive you to work, it might take different routes and so on based on a lot of different information, and all of that information likely comes from the cloud. Of course, all the decision making, the situation analysis, and all of that, all of these algorithms have to be on board, and it has all to work without connectivity. But I think there will be a lot of technology and a lot of, let's say, hybrid solutions with the connectivity in the car and the networking and all of that. But with a lot of, let's say, intelligence in the cloud, which will be used for autonomous driving.
Mm-hmm. So if we had autonomous cars, we could have a lot more connectivity. We could have almost infinite, we could have an awful lot of connectivity. But in the meantime, it seems like we're expecting, a lot of the people I talk to in the industry are saying, they expect the cars to talk to each other, so you can know if the car in front of you and the car in front of that is braking urgently because a deer or a ball or a child has run into the street. And Jim, how's the vehicle-to-vehicle communication get us there or replace that? Or
well, there's a name for that because everyone makes a noun phrase for things that they like. That's a good idea. So EEBL, emergency electronic brake light. So you just described the concept very well. And the connectivity there is a safety proposition. Mm-hmm. So it is different. It could be orthogonal. It could be leading into autonomous driving. And that proposition is based on ubiquity of short-range communication. So that means it's based on a government mandate. And I'm in the Silicon Valley. We talk government mandates. They kind of collide, if you excuse the analogy. But in fact, if indeed this rulemaking occurs, which is dedicated short-range communication, those of you who read the program see that I'm chair of a dedicated short-range communication technical committee in standards. So for me, it's a real world. For you, maybe standards is not so real. But the point is that that connectivity, which is being standardized at a bunch of levels, may be mandated. If so, then that vision that you speak of and other visions that could or may not lead to autonomy will happen.
So, okay, my understanding is there was supposed to be a report in March, and then maybe in July, and then maybe last week, maybe in a few weeks. This, a step toward this, rulemaking that the Obama administration wants to establish, so we can all use the same language and the same wavelength and get these kind of breakthroughs in pretty near term, right? Is that going to happen? Is there enough time to make that rule happen before we have a new president and a new administration that wants to start all over again and put their own stamp on it?
I'm an engineer. So, I mean, certainly the antecedent work that goes into that report has been done. There are a bunch of car makers, some of whom actually are part of it. Mercedes is part of this called CAMP, another proper noun, Crash Avoidance Metrics Partnership, which is working very assiduously with federal dollars and cost share dollars to make it happen. The technical issues are channel congestion, security, whether or not there are minimum performance requirements. All that is happening. It's going to be worked on. Whether it's going to happen before or after the Obama administration ends, and if it does end, then will it even happen? These are questions of conjecture, and we're in the Silicon Valley. We're not in DC. I wish I could answer that.
Well, it seems like maybe we can just solve it with, if we all just agree to move forward without ever having a rule. It could happen.
It could happen in Europe.
That would be nice. So in Detroit, I'm sure it happens throughout the industry everywhere, but I think Detroit and the U.S. auto industry has a particularly kind of bad history of relationships between the automakers and their business partners, their suppliers, their dealers, sometimes even the customers. So, Rob, what's been your experience, and where do you think we can go? Is there room to improve in this brave new world of supercomputers on wheels? Are there breakthroughs that can be made that change the dynamic of how companies deal with each other?
Well, certainly, and the reason I would say that is just it's already happening. So
how so?
Well, you're seeing, I think, you're seeing car companies make a couple fundamental acknowledgments. First of all, the car has now become the single most sophisticated computer that a consumer will own. And if you're
already,
I think we're very close.
Okay.
And I mean, just as a frame of reference, I think we had a current generation processor from NVIDIA is about 384 gigaflops. And if you have a 2-car garage and each car has 4 of them, that's 3 teraflops,
Okay.
which is basically the computing power of the Blue Mountain supercomputer in the United States in 1998, right? So it's gone from that to, to a couple chips.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think car makers have recognized that a consumer, if they're going to have content in their car, why is this content 8 years old, whereas the content that's on my phone is current? So there's lessons that you don't have to reinvent the architecture of a computer. There's lots of lessons that have already been learned in the computer industry. Like, like gamers replace the graphics in their PC, not by swapping out the whole PC, but by adding a graphics card. So having a modular card so that you can upgrade, right, and change the design pretty quickly. So I think there's lessons like that come from the computer industry that the car makers are starting to acknowledge and starting to.
So all we need to do is re-architecture the auto industry. Or the auto, perhaps.
Well, yeah, I didn't say it's all happening at once. I think, but I think as as car makers start to look at all of the shopping list of all the things they want to do, and all those things, I think it's you have to start thinking more like a computer company.
Yeah. So, JJ, you've been doing this for a while, for really as long as I've even been around cars. Is it different? Is the relationship between car makers and technology companies that solve problems for them in a different way than a seat company or a plastics maker that does a console? Is that relationship different, and how's that evolved in your time?
It's very different, actually, in my opinion, and even looking at partnerships, like, for example, with NVIDIA, it's really eye-to-eye level partnerships and relationships with other players like Google, like Apple, like others in the valley, from Facebook through Twitter and all the content providers. We are really thinking, and we are working actually with these companies as partners, and I think it's very different than the traditional, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 type of approach. And actually, we are now in a situation where, if you look at our 70 to 100, ECUs in an S-Class of today with, NVIDIA GPUs and other CPUs and so on, it's like all of these modules, like 70 plus computers in a car. And, we are now involved in basically working directly with like tier 2, tier 3 partners and so on, because it's very important. It's important for our developers, basically, to have a continuation when you think about the user experience design. And if you look at an S-Class of today, for example, with these two 12.3-inch displays and the head-up display, I mean, this digital real estate, is becoming larger and larger, and a lot actually will change, in my opinion, around the connected car and the whole experience, actually, by focusing on this digital user experience in the future, even more so because it's different. We are not just replacing, basically, the old analog instruments with digital displays, and then you basically just draw the same kind of analog instruments. We really basically are working on a completely new generation of advanced technologies and driving the experience to use machine learning, use predictive user experience, where the car can become a good friend, a good old friend, or a digital companion, where when you go into the car already knows where you want to drive, it knows what music you want to listen to, it knows your ambient light setting, it knows your climate control settings, your seat heating, seat cooling, armrest seating, everything, basically is part of your profile, it's part of that experience. And I think over time, basically, you will see that, through these partnerships, we will have, an Apple experience through Apple CarPlay in a Mercedes or, other cars. We'll have an Android experience in the different brands of automobiles. And I think it is basically completely changing on how we view these partnerships and how we work with the different partners.
So, Maarten, as somebody who's newer, who comes from a different industry, I mean, and I realize you're more advanced research than these short-term pedestrian problems, but where do you see areas of conflict or opportunities for change and progress?
conflict. I don't see conflict in opportunities to change. I actually, like JJ says, I think, I feel if it's any time to come into the car industry, it's now. This is like the next, what the world is your oyster if you start having computer power. So for me, it's really about the opportunity, thinking out of the box of what a car is about. And I think, so autonomy is one area where we start thinking about transportation in a completely different way. The connected car, will enhance that even further. And the way that I look at the car might be a little different than the traditional automotive person thinks about the car. I think about the car as a human being having an activity that I'm pursuing, and I want the car to be just like a room in my home. It just happens to be, or in my office, it happens to be on wheels and it moves, but I want it to be seamless. I want it to be functional for what I want to do. And I think the connectivity and autonomy will create this environment that will allow us as a society to think about transportation and cars in a completely different way. That to me is as exciting as thinking about how to live and work on Mars, because it is actually, we can do this in the next 10 years here on Earth. And it's, I found out it's going to take another 50 years to go to Mars. So, so to me, this is where I think innovation will be the next decade will be the car, and and that's why NVIDIA is here. That's why the radios with connectivity that Jim has been researching for the last 10 years. I was just saying to Jim before, it's like if you stay in an industry long enough, it will become interesting. I think it is now. It's really so there is no conflict. There is only opportunity.
Great. Well, I wish my house was as nice as the car you're inventing, but
it will be.
Well, so Jim, when do we need to think beyond the car and into the infrastructure, whether it's smart roads, smart stoplights, other things in the world that need to help us?
I want to answer Maarten's question.
Oh, please.
So I did my first connected car experiment in 1997 using office land. So yeah, I've been around, and I wish it would happen sooner. But back to the infrastructure, and that has been, when should we think about it? We should have thought about it 30 years ago. Because if you go to an old city and you stand underneath a traffic signal, you hear a click, click, click. What is that? That's an electromechanical controller, which is as old as I am. So the point is that cycles of innovation, in the program we talked about short-term cycles of innovation with some company like NVIDIA. And slightly longer, but still, compared to the infrastructure, speed of light, actually, literally and figuratively, cycles of innovation from others. The infrastructure doesn't move that quickly. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we have to convince the infrastructure that the connected car is part of its own ecosystem. And it will be, because with enough market penetration, enough ubiquity, people who own and manage the infrastructure will see cost savings and safety of life, back to these old, excuse the term pedestrian, but it really figuratively, literally is these pedestrian issues, which deal with safety, mobility, and the environment. So the point is that there's already work being done, albeit at a slower, less exciting pace than this. It needs to be quickened. It's not going to happen unless we have a connected car and basically kick the rest of the people in the pants.
So if we get the car, then we get some connectivity more connectivity in the car, then we can get more in the infrastructure, and then they work together.
Yeah, there are a lot of models, but let me give you one, and I don't want to seem like I have only one horse, but let's take this DSRC model. Let's pretend that Washington acts before the end of the Obama administration. Okay. And then that means, like, say, 2019, every car will have to have this radio, this DSRC transceiver. Oh, in about 2 years, 10% of all cars. Hey, that's a great probe. The infrastructure owner-operator will want to have a roadside access point because it will make things more efficient. Then you can have demand-responsive traffic signals. You can do all sorts of traffic controls. So it takes a chicken and an egg, perhaps, but I think that what we have, and I don't want to be pejorative to chickens or eggs, but we've started something with the connected car.
will it probably be, if we get the DSRC, will it probably be like stoplights?
It could be, and you know the thing about stoplights. And so let's talk about let's quit embracing DSRC. Talk about all media.
Right.
So wireless media. So you don't have to do things locally. You could do things centrally. You could do things in a city's traffic control center where you have connectivity to that. Therefore, it doesn't have to be DSRC. But the point is that the connected car connected to what? The cloud, locally, whatever. That will start to spur the rest of us to try to catch up to the cycle of innovation that I just spoke about.
Okay, great. So I hate to admit this in front of this kind of an audience, but I just recently joined Twitter. I put it off because every time, I know, it's been tough. Every time I was about to do it, because it's necessary in my business, right? But every time I was going to do it, somebody would get hacked, right? And then it's like they're sending out headlines they don't mean to. They're sending out press releases that aren't supposed to go out yet, or and I'm very anxious about sending out bad information under my name. So I kept putting it off, and finally I had to do it. But how do we ensure that that first generation, second generation of connected cars isn't as vulnerable as every idiot walking around with a Twitter account? JJ, any thoughts on what we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, we introduced the first connected car in 1999, and so we have some years of experience now having a connectivity module. Even in the analog times, back in 1999. Now, of course, 3G and going to 4G, LTE. And so on. So I think it's very important that you firewall basically all of this, let's say, playground around infotainment, navitainment, entertainment, you name it, even augmented reality and predictive user experience and so on from, the real safety critical, safety relevant, let's say action and modules and actuator sensors and so on. So that's the most important. So that even when someone can break into the car, can reach the car, somehow hack into, that they cannot do anything wrong. Yeah. So let's assume worst case is that maybe your music stops playing, your internet radio or so. So I think it's important that we pay a lot of attention, to security, to data privacy, and I think we have learned, over basically the last 14 years, 15 years, that this can be done and can be achieved. And we have actually our own teams actually of hackers, of white hackers as we call them, which basically take every new generation of vehicles, of systems and so on, and try to break into it and try to see where there are basically points which we need to improve before we ship. Mm-hmm. And we take that very seriously.
So somebody's not going to be able to swoop in on all the cars in America and make 1/3 of them go 100 miles an hour, 1/3 of them go backwards, and 1/3 of them stop?
Not Mercedes, no.
Not Mercedes.
Only Mercedes.
Well, is there going to be Jim, do we need an industry standard? Is there going to have to be a special cop a special national cop to keep our roads safe that way?
There's a difference between standards and enforcement.
Okay.
But in fact, there are ETSI or European standards, and there is in fact an IEEE standard. If you want to talk to me afterwards and you want to be really excited, go to IEEE 1609 meetings with me. But the real institutional framework to build this in terms of a safety critical connectivity, which is slightly different than a telematics or IVI type of connectivity, then you would think, well, you need a PKI system or something like that. Then you need a system of trust and a certificate authority. Then the government gets involved. It becomes a big question mark. So certainly we know technically how to do cryptography. We know how to pass certificates. But how do we do it institutionally? Big questions.
Mm-hmm. Rob, and
well, actually, I have a question for these guys. I had talked earlier just about the lessons learned from the industry. I mean, last week I was at another conference and I sat with the NHTSA guy, and I asked him, why is all of this being treated as something completely new? Why aren't there? Why isn't this built on things we've already learned in the cellular industry? We all have learned a long time ago to trust banking online and financial things. And yes, you're not driving a car and running over people, but you have the ability. There's the potential for lots of financial damage and everything if you don't have secure systems and firewalls and all of those things. So I guess the question, maybe I would ask Jim is, what are the new things that are being brought up? Why isn't it just, building on a lot of the things that we've already established?
It's extremely nuanced, and I said I was an engineer, so nuance really isn't I can barely spell it. But in essence, if you have a mandated system, that means that issues of trackability, if the government knows who you are, and issues of privacy will become social issues. So, if you opt into something, then there are all sorts of social ways that you can acceptably provide this type of security. If you don't opt into something, it becomes much more difficult.
Now, isn't this something we do now? I mean, you do that on your phone. You do it when you're...
Yeah, but I don't have to. Actually, I guess I do. It's a social imperative. I don't have to own a smartphone. But if someone says you must have this in your car, it becomes a bigger issue. And I don't want to bore the audience with all the issues, but post facto we can talk about them. But they're manyfold, and it's one of the more complicating factors to having a rulemaking.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think just the only thing I would just add, from our perspective, there's obviously, it's an application-dependent thing, right? If a video game fails, or if if your nav system fails, or your song stops playing, that's not a mission-critical thing. But there are lots of applications within the computing world where you have mission-critical types of applications, and then there's a number of technologies that come to bear on that. So whether it's ECC or virtualization or all sorts of things that you work on to deliver that. So I kind of see that a lot of the security issues, again, and I'm kind of going back to the theme. I think everything, I agree, right? There's a difference between engineering a solution and whatever happens on the regulation side. But I believe that again, breaking it down to maybe it's too much from a Silicon Valley perspective, but breaking it down into a computer problem, these are things that we've worked on before.
Yeah. So I would challenge one computer problem that I don't know anybody who has solved this, and I actually know of no research being done on this, and that is about autonomy and security. This is a field that yes, people have done encryption and cryptography and solve the post office problems and the banking problems. We still have break-ins, right?
Target,
so it's still right. But nobody has developed a autonomous system that, when it's broken into, will always act correctly and can detect that it's broken into and then act according to what you're trying to do. And this, to me, is a research area that I think this is fascinating. To me, this is like, wow, give me a problem that nobody has solved yet. This is something that I think is a fabulous research problem to have. And I don't think the computer industry has solved this problem. Not in the military, not at NASA, not in industry, and not at academia. And I think this is, what a great thing the autonomous car will bring to the world, is that we will do research in this.
Yeah, Maarten, if all the problems were solved, then I'd be out of a job. So.
Yeah, so that, I think, is a fascinating problem.
All right, so that's the challenge for you guys. Solve that problem. It'd be a great future for you. So before you get to your questions, we're going to do a quick lightning round. Quick question for each of you. Okay, so what is your biggest hope, the thing that's most exciting to you that you hope will come about in connected cars in the next 10 years? Rob, start with you.
Wow. I guess in the next 10 years, I imagine, and what I hope, is that we will see a combination of a bunch of technologies that up until now have been kind of separate. So, we've had speech recognition, but we've had human-machine interface, we've had high-resolution displays, but I think touching on something JJ mentioned earlier, you know, the opportunity for all of these different applications to come together in a rolling, you know, in a computer that informs you, makes driving more safe, and delights you, you know, is I think something that's transformational. You know, it's not just about, you know, the experience, but I think we're talking about real social problems, lost productivity in the nation, you know, the kind of things that, you know, effective computer vision in a car can solve are very real and could change our lives and improve, I think, society overall.
Great. Okay, you were first, so you get a little bit of slack, but lightning round, quick answers. JJ?
So for me,
Biggest hope.
For me, the car is actually the ultimate mobile device. And with that, thinking about the next 10 years, I mean, having autonomous driving as a given, and then thinking beyond autonomous driving. Now, think about you are in this car, it drives you from A to B, and it can become whatever you want it to be. You know, your lounge, your living room, your movie theater, your you know, musical hall with an awesome sound system, which you don't even have in, you know, your living room at home, and I think, you know, combine that with the digital experience, you know, with augmented reality and you know, with basically having the car be whatever you want it to be in that moment in time, and maybe even in a 1 hour commute to have, you know, slices of 20 minutes, you know, lounge mode, and 20 minutes, maybe your office space, and even a video conference with your office and so on with people at work, and then another 20 minutes of, you know, basically the musical hall or music theater. That would be awesome.
All right. Jim?
The World Health Organization says there are 1 million road fatalities a year. I would like to see the connected car make a big dent. Excuse the pun.
So wait, I'm sorry, 1 million
Road fatalities.
work-related fatalities? Road fatalities.
That's right.
Worldwide.
Many of them pedestrians, which is another dimension of connectivity, particularly in emerging economies. But even in the United States, it's dropping, but it's still on the order of 30,000 fatalities, about 15 to 20% pedestrian. We can do a lot with a connected car in those dimensions.
Great, thanks. Maarten?
So I second what Jim says. You know, zero emission, zero fatalities is one of Nissan's slogans. I think that would be a great thing to achieve. But beyond that, I want to wake up in the morning and my car knows where I'm going. It actually started planning the night before and told me what time I need to leave. It actually wakes me up and makes coffee. Her name is Sally, by the way. And I want to have...
That's a perfect
Let's just leave
You're
it
done.
at that.
You're right there. Sally the car in 10 years. All right.
But by the way, Sally is the name of Asimov's book about the autonomous vehicle in 2054. He wrote it in 1954, and I urge you all. It's only 18 pages long or something, a short story. In 2054, the cars talk to each other. Their engine, he didn't think about electric cars, but the engines were humming. And that humming was running 24 hours, talking to each other, saying like, do you remember that people thought in 2025, where they still were better drivers than we are? So that's why the name is Sally, by the way.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so autonomous car driving in 10 years? Really? JJ? That's what you said, right?
You
Before the decade.
You asked me what my
hope and dream.
Kind of hope and dream was.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Okay, so conversely, biggest fear about connectivity in the next 10 years, in the 5-10 years? Start at the other end, Maarten.
Yeah, the biggest fear, I have a coin now in my office. It says CIA on it. They came to visit me. And I thought, what have I done wrong? But it wasn't. It could be a dangerous weapon.
It could be. Great. Jim?
Well, the dangerous weapon part. We as humans are terrible supervisors. We knew this in World War II when radar operators fell asleep. So the complacency, the fact that we have this index of risk risk homeostasis, some academics would call it. And we don't know how to measure risks, so we think we're really safe in a connected car, but we really aren't, and we become more dangerous.
Yeah, good point. JJ?
I think it is the security and the data privacy part, and you know, I see ourselves actually building cars where you can switch it to off mode, to be completely offline, and actually that might be a requirement over the next 10 years to have that. So when people or if customers choose not to be let's say delivering any information, not to have any data basically leave the car, not having any profile set, not having anything, basically no communication unless there is some mandating that cars have to talk to each other potentially or so. But I think you will see some developments in this direction just because people are afraid.
Mm-hmm. It's a challenge. It'll be a difficult balance. Rob?
Well, I echo the security, the data security aspect of it, and I think that overall, I don't know that I have so much of fear, but just an acknowledgement of the challenges, to build this type of a device. Aside from the complexity of safety features, it's just an extremely We talked about earlier. You asked a question about is everything just rosy on this vision, and it's certainly going to be extremely difficult to build this car. And I'm not just talking about the processing, but this is an extremely ambitious computer, and it's not enough to build it, to just build it, and then charge consumers a tremendous amount of money for it. You have to. I think we have to acknowledge things that we've done in the computer industry to bring lots of innovation down to a price point where all consumers can benefit from it. It's not going to help if there's only a few cars and only the premium high-end cars are safe. You somehow have to bring this capability down into mainstream, and what that requires is architecture and thoughtfulness on how you design this vehicle. So I think making it mainstream is one of the not a fear, but just one of the challenges that for this industry.
Yeah, a social challenge as well as an engineering challenge. Great. Thank you to these guys. Please. I know you all have questions and thoughts of your own. Let's start back there.
I'm Mike Shepard from Growth Point. I was at a Churchill Club a few weeks ago at Citrix, and they had Joey Ito and Reid Hoffman up, and the two of them were talking about, well, it's going to happen when Maarten's Sally decides that in the inevitable carnage that's happening right in front of them, that in order to save the lives of the other people in the other cars, Sally's going to kill you. She's going to make that decision. Yeah. What's going to happen? When is this stuff going to be? What I heard is some of the states are actually allowing these self-driving cars to be legal and approved now or imminently. What's the state of the government legislation around licensing these self-driving vehicles?
Since you alluded to Sally, we'll let Maarten start with that.
Asimov had a rule for that. Rule number 1: a robot can never kill, a human. So anyway.
But there is still the decision tree if the choice is somehow, between killing 3 humans and killing 1, it should choose to kill the 1.
This is an ethical dilemma. At the Nissan Research Center, we have a meetup every month, and I had an ethics professor talk about this dilemma. This is not a new dilemma. This dilemma has been recognized in the HRI community, Human-Robot Interaction community, where there is this ethical dilemma of somebody who builds a robotic system with decision-making. And sure, if we can all leave it up to machine learning and all, to deep learning, and we don't know anymore how the car comes up with its rules, but there are decisions that one needs to make, and it's an ethical problem. It's an ethical engineering problem that you cannot just swipe under the carpet. So these are tough issues, and you know, I hate to see it that, you know, you pay more for a car, you're safer. You know, that I don't, you know, so these are tough you know, questions.
Continues to be the case. Next question.
Oh, good evening. I'm Dr. Donna Schaefer, and I have some students with me this evening. So as a teacher, I have to ask, what does the driver's ed class of the future look like?
Very nice question. Anyone?
An NVIDIA video game.
Let's see if Jim and Rob can take a stab at that.
Well, I imagine it's an online video tutorial. You know, you just.
It's an app.
The driver ed guy is out of a job. I don't know.
So I'm going to give away my age indirectly, but in the 70s, I took driver's ed, and we had simulators. And we called them stimulators.
When was this?
In the 70s. We called them, say it louder again. We called them stimulators because there was actually, didn't have NVIDIA type graphics. And then
we were not around.
And the force feedback on the throttle wasn't there, so we'd go up our driveways at 80 miles an hour. But that's in the past. In the future, you can take and imagine products that your company is famous for. And a little bit of engineering, you can actually have a very intense, immersive experience. And I'm not a great prognosticator, but learning from the past, I think that there will be a radical change in how we handle, you know, things like being asleep with automated cars and how you train people.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the art of simulation is one of the areas where NVIDIA spends a fair amount of time. So whether it's flight or driving simulators, but you know, Kyle Busch uses a simulator to practice driving. You know, and it's not just about how something visually appears, but also how do things behave. So you know, what is the physics of going on? If you hit a bump at a certain speed, then what will the reaction of the car be? So the simulation, at least within our world, is more than just visual fidelity. It's also about how things behave properly, and those things have come an enormous amount, an enormous way. So I don't know. I think that might be one answer.
Yeah. Thank you for inventing a new line of business for video.
I actually think it is not an easy problem. So I've been driving the Q50 with ADAS system for more than half a year. This car, in the right country, not in the United States, but in Europe, could drive for minutes at a time without touching the steering wheel, if you would allow it. On 280, it can do quite a lot of time, keeping lane and stopping and, you know, just driving. It is not something you just step into and understand where the limits of that system is. So in the early stages of the way the car manufacturers will bring autonomy to the consumer will not be as full autonomy. And in some ways, we have to learn how to deal with this. And I think, you know, there will be a question whether this should be part of the driver's training, is to learn how to deal with an autonomy that is not 100% full autonomy, and that you have to step in and at what time, and what is the system not supposed to, you know, what you're not supposed to be doing with the system. Recently, this last couple of weeks, there have been some videos on YouTube about usage of these type of systems that, you know, I don't think is very smart to do, and you know, people will need to know about that, what the limitations are. And the more autonomy becomes to full autonomy, so the more capable the autonomy becomes, but is not perfect, the more difficult it will be to understand what the limitations of a system are. And that is a problem that we have to solve, but it's also a problem of the young drivers or the new drivers. And then I'm not even touching about driver fatigue, like what the airlines are you know, seeing now with autonomous pilots or automatic pilots in airplanes, where you don't just have the experience anymore when you need to take over. So it is a serious issue, I think.
So next question here. Yeah, over there.
Hi, my name is Gautam Ashok, and I'm from Accenture. Wonderful discussion. As you were all discussing about the connected car, a thought occurred to me as to what's the current state of the internet infrastructure, the cellular infrastructure in the United States, and as it were, I happened to look at my smartphone, and you probably might have read articles over the years as to how the US is lagging behind when it comes to connectivity. And I'm assuming that if a car has to communicate to the cloud, it would have to be, if you look at the present day, it would probably be through cell phone towers. So I was wondering, if that aspect is going to get more focus, and what needs to be done to really push the upgrading of the infrastructure. And I just had a quick question on, as cars become more and more autonomous, do you foresee a cultural shift? Because for quite some time, you can say that the car has been, you can say, an expression of the individualism of the people in this country. So as people, I guess, find themselves less and less in charge of driving, you think that'll get accepted over time from a cultural point?
So sort of two parts. One is the state of the cellular network, and the other is the individual experience. Right. Jim, can you take the first one?
Well, sure, why not? Thanks. JJ was giving a dream where he hoped that we would have autonomous cars in 10 years. But 10 years from now, think about telephony in the cell system. You're going to have 5G. So don't look at your cell phone now. Imagine yourself looking at better connectivity in 10 years. And maybe verticals or use cases that really tend to lend themselves toward connected cars. If you think about DSRC, this horse that I rode in on, that's short-range communication. So wow, what does that mean? You have to have a hotspot within connectivity range of virtually every road. That's not going to happen here, not in 100 years. You may see them at most intersections, but that's only at a hotspot around an intersection. So don't put all your eggs in one basket as the short term. The longer term is that if there is a consumer demand for us to have connectivity and mobility, there will be an infrastructure, perhaps a private sector infrastructure, that meets that demand.
Great. And the individual expression, JJ, I imagine you are eager to take that one on. Is it an inside the cockpit expression instead of an external one? Or?
Yeah, but I think the point was also the acceptance of basically the autonomous car. And actually, we have done already studies in our large simulator where we have brought customers in and we have done interviews and basically monitored the participants and saw basically how high the acceptance level were before they actually heard of the autonomous car and so on, and then going through the process of teaching them what it can do, what it cannot do, what the limitations are, then actually being in the simulator, driving in through through different scenarios on the highway, and then just staying in one lane, following a car type of scenario, and then also like doing maneuvers like passing other cars on the highway and so on, and then even directly after let's say the experience of having been in an autonomous car, and then actually later on, even weeks after that experience, you could see the acceptance level was extremely high, and it stayed actually at a very high level after the experience. So what I expect to happen is actually that the acceptance level will be very high, and that as people get used to it, as people experience it, as people learn to trust the system, like they learn to trust cruise control and Distronic Plus, in our case, adaptive cruise control, and so on, I think it will happen, and it will be massively adopted and accepted.
Great. Next question.
Hi, this is Ashu Goyal from Winwire. JJ. Quick question around healthcare. I'm surprised I didn't hear about connectivity onto the healthcare side. So if you can talk and hear a little bit more about sort of a mobile healthcare unit, your car as a mobile healthcare unit, that would be great.
Maarten, that sounds like an astronaut problem.
Yeah, actually I worked on healthcare for the astronaut in the spacesuit. We had speech dialogue, and you could ask, and it was tied to a plan, and so it could tell when to drink, when to eat, when to go back because the oxygen was running out. It's a very difficult problem for the car manufacturers, the healthcare issue, because of the business model, right? I mean, there has to be a way to make money of a service that you provide in the car. And so it has to be, it is about, first of all, a cost issue about what sensors do you bring in the car, right? And then if you really talk about healthcare, these sensors, do they need to be FDA approved? Then you're not talking about cheap sensors. So this is not a simple answer to sure, we can, and then the other question, well, okay, you can bring Fitbit into your car, and can you then connect Fitbit, and then, what is then the value of that? And, it's really, is the car manufacturer going to, have to create that and support that? Is that, so these are, it's more a business problem than it is a technology problem. And this, by the way, I think we haven't discussed yet, but the issue of, what is the business model to provide services to the customer in the car that you can make money off is still an unsolved problem. And I think healthcare is one of those. From a safety point of view, if you're in an accident and the car can tell the EMT, that you're still alive, what happened, where are you broken, that would be nice. But are you willing to pay for it? That's the question.
So if I can get the Flintstone car that will give me my workout and measure the calories in my heart.
That would maybe, that's a great idea.
Great.
I'll make that. No.
There you go. Take that home with you. My innovation of the day. Next question, please. Where are we? There
Hi. Thank you so much for the discussion. I have a question. I went to a hackathon by launch, and there was a middleware platform called Carvoyant, which basically just connects a chip inside the car system, and anyone can hack, not the internal framework and do some crazy stuff, but just using the data of the car to build something. And I thought, to answer the personalization problem, that can really solve it to a certain degree, where instead of dealing with the applications and platforms that are currently available in the car, people can just build their own plugins and applications that best fits the requirement. So I was wondering, will the car have any form, will the car manufacturing firms or industries have any form of, for example, instead of having interior, exterior, and accessories you can select from, also for example, what are the customized plugins that you would like to have? Or if there's a way where, for example, a hacker like myself can just connect something that says if I'm close to a gas station, and hopefully when the gas station can accept bitcoins or any other form of things virtually, I can just have my car stand next to it, and the gas pump is already paid for without me doing anything.
Yeah, Nissan will have the autonomous SDK, and you can change the autonomous.
But I think the answer is, at least on our side, multifold. So there are platforms out there, like Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, which I think will enable, third-party developers in one way or another to write application for the automotive use case. And you will also see, and we have also worked with, and we have our own kind of, SDK type solution to work with, maybe not each individual customer around the world, but with smaller companies, larger companies, and so on, to bring solutions through the cloud, through the smartphone, and so on to the car. So I think this is probably very, let's say, kind of OEM specific, and there will likely not be one SDK for all OEMs besides, let's say, kind of the big players like Apple or Google.
Great. Next question.
Thank you. Hi, Brian Gonch with Deloitte. We've talked about a lot of connectivity tonight, but one thing we didn't talk about is connections to the insurance industry.
To the what?
Insurance industry. So you have a lot of costs you described and some legal liability and some other things with autonomous and connected cars, but there could be a ton of savings, and the insurance companies could reap some of those savings and pass it along, maybe, to consumers. So could you talk a little bit about how a black box to insurance or some other form of connection to insurance could help pay for some of all this?
So solutions are already available. Kind of pay-as-you-drive packages and so on. There are different insurance companies which are already offering that, partially through their own kind of dongle, which you plug into your OBD port, which gets all the information. So it's also available, let's say, through kind of built-in connected modules. And it's, I think even the insurance companies, let's say, I would say they're still playing with this topic and figuring out, is it good for them or does it hurt their business models and so on. So There is some adoption, but I think both sides are basically still trying it out in pilots and seeing whether it makes sense or not. Because I think customers are also somewhat, let's say, cautious in terms of what data and so on is available about them, and is it really helping them or is it hurting them in the longer term?
Jim, I know you're not a big prognosticator, but I suspect you
I
have
will.
some thoughts about what's happening there.
And I don't work for a car company, and after I say this, I never will. But something that's very analogous to that is the road user fee idea. So we pay a gas tax. Well, that we've probably seen that the Highway Trust Fund almost went bankrupt. This is unsustainable. Well, if we pay by time of day or by demand or by route, the connected car can enable that. And that's very similar in technology to user-based insurance, where you would then geo-fence or geo-zone someone's travel and temporally segment where someone travels. And that could be just as powerful an incentive, at least from the social good perspective. You may think it's bad to pay this usage tax, but from a social perspective as insurance, as a way to spur connectivity, albeit from a pretty unpopular way by some of your customers. But as I said, I don't work for Mercedes or Nissan.
Great, thank you. Next question.
Robert Mullins, I'm a tech reporter here in Silicon Valley. Right now, some of the car technology, the connected car technology, is seen by some people as a contributor to distracted driving. And I'm wondering how you develop your connected car technology going forward to where it's not a source of distracted driving, but a truly autonomous car, as you've talked about this evening. Also, a quick follow-up question. Will we still be able to have car chases in the movies?
We used to have so many movies that were about somebody trying to get to a phone, right? Or a phone wire that was kind of like, they don't make any sense to the kids that are born in 2000.
We have car chases and you'll never catch each other.
Yeah, but to your first question, it's a very valid question. I think it's kind of twofold. Until we have fully autonomous cars, level 4 automation, in between now and that time, you will see a lot of focus actually on minimizing driver's distraction. And if you look at even like a head-up display versus a display mounted in your dashboard, I mean that already helps immensely. With using that for all kinds of, especially driving-related, kind of information and maybe even action and so on. You don't have to take your eyes off the road. And it's much safer than actually having to look down away from the road level. And another big focus area is voice and multimodal interaction with these computers, with the car, with the cloud, with basically all of your content, and making that more reliable, making it not a frustrating experience as it often is today. That is actually huge. And there are huge investments in doing off-board and hybrid voice recognition and so on, having all these servers in the cloud basically supporting that. And in my opinion, there are a lot of, let's say, good solutions and good, let's say, investments in this area to minimize distraction until we get to the point where the car drives safely from A to B, where then that's not a topic anymore, and actually these side tasks, as we call them, are fully okay to basically have you doing a video conference call or having your car being a movie theater.
Great. Next question.
Hi, my name is Akil Hitter. I'm with Windwire. Last year, there were more than 10,000 drunk driving deaths in the U.S. That means every 48 minutes, a person is dying. How about leveraging autonomy and connected to enforce, if you're drunk, you're not driving? I mean, is that a technology that can be built as a regulation, or is there something that the car manufacturers can enforce so that doesn't happen? Secondly, what about people who are in, and I'm using this as an analogy, Joe Blow from Texas, he says, it's against my independence, you collecting all this data and data privacy. How do you measure and see the two evolving?
Am I the designated regulation?
You're the regulation guy, right?
So, you know, you can do ignition, alcohol interlock, or ignition switches. But see, I'm not a politician, I just vote for them. But as I understand that the politicians don't want that to happen. But to your point, alcohol is a contributor, co-contributor about a third of fatalities on US roads. Speeding and seatbelt usage are the other co-contributors. So if you can do something with regulation to address all those, that's great. I'm going to say that the technology is already there. It's not necessarily a connected car technology. It just requires political will. So this is a discussion that transcends this type of technology, although I can imagine some use cases where the connectivity and enforcement, another bad set of words, could actually be beneficial to society. But again, I'm not going to posture a way to vote, and I don't think that if you voted for someone or in that platform, he or she would get elected.
Yeah, but also if we get to level 4, right, then you can sit in the back seat and pour
right.
yourself a cocktail, right?
Exactly. We'll see when we get there.
We'll see when we get there, yeah, if we get there. Right?
Yeah, but I also wanted to add, I mean, some small steps in this direction, what we can do and have done, like all Mercedes models, you know, from the A-Class in Europe, CLA here in the US, all the way to an S-Class, S-Class Coupe, basically have serious equipment, the attention assist, which monitors basically your driving behavior and your interaction with the steering wheel, and we have kind of 17 different, you know, sensing, let's say, algorithms and so on working, and they bring you a little coffee cup and tell you that you should take a break now as soon as the car realizes that you are about to fall asleep. I think that's already a good step, and I think every car on the road should have this. And of course, next steps can follow. Sensor technology, it's all available.
You did mention earlier the possibility of a switch or a button that you could turn off your connectivity, or whether that would be required or just an option. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add to that in response to the question, or did you have more you wanted to elaborate?
What I would say is data privacy is very important, and I think we're taking that very seriously and thinking differently. You know, what you know from smartphones today, at least from some, that it's more on, you know, kind of an opt-out model where all these services and so on, and getting data, you know, out of the devices. If you think about all the sensors and cameras and everything you have on your smartphone, you know, I think the topic already starts there about, you know, are customers really willing to share all this data and so on. And I think switching it from an opt-out to an opt-in model where everything is turned off and actually customers have to actively, you know, opt in and accept, let's say, certain data to leave the car or leave your device. I think it's already a big help, and it will help actually address and make people more aware of actually which data is even you know, shared or is communicated, and what is the benefit for the customer if they opt in, what is the level of service they get back, and so on. So I think there will be a lot of good, let's say, discussions, and I think the way we are about to actually work on this and implement it with the opt-in model and being very transparent and having the ability to switch everything off, I think it's very important, and will help actually building trust, I think, even in specific brands. If you handle it well, I think customers will be more willing to trust certain brands and maybe even pick a certain car model or make.
Yeah, sounds good. Jim, did you have anything to add as the non-regulator? As the anything on that?
No, actually, I don't own data. I give it up freely to companies like Mercedes. But no, I don't make a car. I only drive them.
All right. So we still have some time for a few more questions. Next up.
I'm Gigi Segal from TCS, and Robert over there, who I don't know, sort of stole my thunder. So you may have answered some of the part of the question I'm about to ask. But just practically speaking, two questions. One is logistics. As presuming these things start rolling out, there isn't going to be a time where everybody is 100% on connected cars or 100% on autonomous cars. You're going to probably have a mixed model. 10 years from now, I'm probably still driving my Honda CR-V, and my daughter, who's a teenager now, is probably happily texting away or whatever the equivalent is then in a completely autonomous car. And then there's the guy from Texas maybe in his connected car, but he's still driving it to some degree. So what do the roadways look like? What does the crowd control, the traffic control looks like? Coexisting, sharing the road in this kind of model. And then a follow-up question, just speculating that if this is based on some kind of demographic / geographic zoning or whatever, and some kind of control in that sense, what is the tipping point for the early adopters versus the late adopters versus the people in the middle?
Good questions. Anyone able to jump up to that?
Sounds like I'm in an Institute of Transportation Engineers meeting. But basically, the people who are in charge of road operations are asking the exact questions as you. And I, for one, don't have the answer, and the community largely doesn't have the answer. Just a thing about this DSRC connectivity, and your point comes to heart. Say that 20% of all cars have DSRC transceivers on them. All things being equal, the probability of you encountering another one is about 4%. So it's going to take a long time for this network of car-to-car connectivity. Car-to-cloud is a completely different story, and that is perhaps the happier and shorter story.
So I would also add, your question is the struggle for the car manufacturers to decide what to bring to market, when, and how to bring it to market. And this is not an easy, it's not an easy answer, and it will, by going slow, I mean, if you look at the way, for instance, Nissan and Infiniti communicate about the technology in the car, they don't go out and advertise that it is a steer-by-wire car in the Q50. And it is, but these cars are driving on the road today. I can tell you, it drives very nicely. It drives a lot better than any other steering wheel I've ever felt, because they're, even in the United States on their highways, it can still hold your cup of coffee in your hand because it doesn't go like this. And so technology will come more and more, will be accepted, but we will have to bring it to market with the knowledge that you will be driving your CR-V for the next 10 years. And and it will have to live together with all these cars. So it is it's a balancing act of how much to bring to market when, and when will people accept it. And it is the customer that will either accept it or not. I think that is the big question that everybody is wondering. I think Mercedes is wondering that. We are wondering that, and
yeah. I think last week we had a chance to listen to one of the guys in the Department of Transportation for Michigan, and he was actually describing that 100 years ago we've already gone through this kind of a transformation. Everybody rode horses, and when you rode a horse on the road, it was all horses. And then when a car, an iron horse came, and it was a 2-lane road, then the cars went on the inside lane, and the horses were moved out, to the outer lane. And then after a period of time when there were enough cars, then the horses weren't allowed to go on the freeway, and they had to go on a side road. So, over a period of time, we're certainly going to have a mixed fleet. With I think the average life, car life, at 11 years, certainly within 10 to 15 years, there's not going to be, a fully autonomous, fleet of cars out there. So I could have, I think the way that this gentleman imagined it, depending on, the evolution of the cars, and as the mix increases, you can imagine the inside lane of your freeway is an autonomous lane, and you can move at a, faster speed, and then the next lane over is semi-autonomous, or, there's probably something like that you can see, evolving, similar to what happened 100 years ago.
Good point. Thanks for remembering that. Next question.
Yeah, hi. Charlie Vogelheim from Motor Trend. So first of all, comment to Mercedes when you're monitoring all these people. If you could just let them get out of the left lane if they're not passing somebody, that'd be awesome. We would be very thankful for that. So just take them over right away. A lot of things you were talking about connectivity, and just want to bring it down to maybe a little bit unsexy in the way that the battleground of who owns the IP, who owns the instrument panel. Is it the consumer? Is it the OEM? Is it the third party that's developing it? And then also the next level of battleground is the connectivity. Why is it the car that needs to connect? We've all got smartphones. Why isn't that just making all the connection? And why don't all the smartphone users connect with each other, and we have GPSs and we can see closure rates, and now all of a sudden you're involving pedestrian and cyclists into the whole mix and something like that? How real is that kind of statement, though?
Thanks, Charlie. You've stunned them.
That's already happened. That's all, I mean,
well, I guess I'll open it up or just start out. Certainly, when you move from physical gauges to a digital cluster environment, you obviously have a lot more options now. I think one of the first objectives of a digital cluster or digital dashboard is safety. You want to improve the way that information is presented to you so that you can make better decisions and drive more safely. But at the same time, there's no doubt we have an SDK for designing a cluster, and as part of that, you can customize it. You can choose. The car maker can match the style of the interior of your car, which consumers pay a lot for, and match it to the physical design and the graphic design of what's inside your cluster, and then theoretically you could have some choices. So certainly all of these things are now possible, and this opens up this new world of both some amount of control that I'm sure the car makers want to have, because you don't want to turn over all control. Hey, I don't need a speedometer, and just remove it from your panel. So I think there's some amount of control and then some amount of customization, which people expect when they have a consumer device or a computer. Right? As far as the other stuff, I'll let somebody else comment.
But on the connectivity side, we have actually built in different models, actually depending on the market. Like since 1999, our cars in the United States are connected, and we made this a standard equipment. A few years later, that basically every single car has a connectivity module, now 3G. In Europe, for example, we started with a model where the customer would bring in the connectivity. So we use actually the customer's smartphone connectivity with tethering and so on. But we are also moving in Europe now to a model where each vehicle, also has at least a 2.5G connectivity. Also, basically working already on the LTE generation and so on for that. So just to ensure, for certain basic services, we don't want to rely on the customer having a tethering contract or having the right technology in the car and so on and so on. So I think at least in the premium segment, you will see that the car will bring in its own connectivity for many different services, and both bringing kind of the internet in the car and also the car being part of the internet of everything, because it makes a lot of sense. I think on the, let's say, maybe more mass market brands and vehicles, they probably start at the other end, and then there's a mix in between.
So you're talking, in a sense, about the democratization of connectivity to anyone who has this ubiquitous smartphone. And usually when I channel standards in a big audience, I'm a wet blanket. But in fact, the ETSI, which I said earlier was European Telecommunication Standards Institute, SAE, which if you're Motor Trend, you know what that is. There is a joint work on V2P applications layer that is media independent message sets to try to, at least in the standardization realm, is to imagine this world, this picture that you're painting. How it gets instantiated is perhaps everyone else's job here, but at least the standards and the thought that you have, which is very meritorious, is being worked on. Lots of devil in the details, and I invite you to go to standards meetings with me and multitask, please, because they're really slow, but the point is that things are happening.
I also think it's happening today, right? You're not going to stop it. Bringing your own phone in the car and having connectivity, and apps will show up that will allow you to connect to other folks, on the road. they're already there, like Waze. And so, you know, I don't, like every other technology that is out there, it's not an either or kind of proposition.
That's what I wondered, like, are you making a decision going, let the phone do that, and no, we'll let the car do this, so you actually drawing lines like.
The question is whether we draw lines of where we let the phone do certain things and let the car do other things. You know, I think it's, at least from what I understand right now, you know, it's a product planning kind of decision. And then you have the issue right now that the car is 18, you know, goes on, I think it's even more than 11 years, it's 18 years.
11 is the average age of the car, of a car on the road. So you can expect most cars to last 20 years or so. I think 20% of the vehicles on the road are more than 16 years old at this point. So yeah, we're talking about a long adoption period.
So I think it's a product planning kind of question, and then a business model question more than what the capabilities are. I mean, of course we can do everything. The customer will demand, you know, I think both. Yeah.
Great. We'll have just 2 more questions. One over here.
Hi, I'm from Sama Technologies insurance practice, and there was already a question regarding insurance. So all this big data analytics of the telematics data is very interesting to us. But what really happens once, you know, autonomous cars are there? Like, what happens to insurance at that time? I mean, they're a very good, big part of our revenue. So.
When there are no crashes.
Guess who will be crying about that?
Not the consumer. Anyone have anything more to add? I mean, it's
you know,
if you can make it crash-free car.
If I can help that I have to pay less for insurance, you know, I'll be on it.
Yeah, you'll all get Nobel prizes. Next question, last question.
All right. Thanks for the great discussion. My name is Yo from Drive Mode, which is a Android-based UX app for drivers in the connected car field. We're still in stealth, so nobody except for a few people know about us. But so I have a question to JJ and Maarten, which is, so when I saw the brochure, it says who can win, right? Then in these kind of events, Apple or Google never show up, and they don't say anything to us, right? But you guys are working with them. Are that because they are winning, or, you know, because they are basically saying that they're going to do all of those things that we are talking about, and then they're like, we don't need you, right? And then, but you guys are working with them. So I'm just wondering, what's your views on those guys who are basically saying that we're going to dominate the connected car industry, and then, you know, you guys give us data, and then we'll take care of it, right? So I just wonder why you guys are working with them, Apple and Google, those guys.
Those guys.
Apple and Google, JJ.
Yeah.
So,
I'll let JJ start first.
to be very clear, actually, I think Apple and Google, on the one hand, they are great partners. They have helped us in great deal, actually, to make the connected car reality. If I think about all the Google services, you know, you have in a Mercedes from Google Local Search, Google Places, Google Street View, Panoramio, Google Maps, very intelligent search with autocomplete, and so on and so on. It's great, and we have relationship with Google, and we have a strategic partnership. And of course, you know, if you look at the next level with Android Auto or you know, Apple CarPlay, now with an Apple experience or a Google experience in, you know, our vehicles, in everyone's vehicles, the game kind of changes. But you know, for us, clearly, it actually motivates us to make our Mercedes-Benz experience the best, and then let the customer choose. I think at the end of the day, the market, the customers, you know, will vote for and will choose, you know, the experience which is the best. And if you think about, you know, the opportunities we have with, you know, an immersive experience, I talked about the two 12.3-inch displays, a head-up display, and, you know, kind of, let's say, imagining the map kind of being at the forefront and being a central point, and having, you know, contextual-based information and a very smart, let's say, machine learning algorithm with predictions and then, for example, access to the head-up display, which only we have for our own Mercedes-Benz experience, and so on. I think it will actually be a very open playing field, and it's actually good to have competition in the space. And I think what we can learn, certainly from Apple, is to build simple solutions and making the UI, making the UX being very simple, very intuitive. Because certainly we have built systems, which are quite complex and not so easy to use. And I'm sure many of you driving a Mercedes today wish, we would do a better job and having a very easy interface. And in that regards, I think it helps at the end to have solutions which are, on the one hand, easy to use and so on, and also open for, companies like yours or other partners to actually build experiences and build innovation on top of these platforms.
Maarten?
What he said. No. Gosh, I think it's a hot potato. It's kind of like I don't even know what to do with the question, because as a consumer of Apple and Google products, and I'm stepping in my car. So I want this experience to be seamless, right? My Sally idea is not so far-fetched. If I'm in the home and I'm working on something and I get in the car, I don't want to have to suddenly change. I want to be seamless. So Google and Apple right now are the companies that are providing that. I'm not sure if they're going to be there doing that forever, or the only ones who are going to do that. And we will have to change if the industry, the car industry, has been around for a lot longer, and so we will have to make sure that yes, all this will be possible, and then you also want to build your own product brand identity and capture the customer for a longer period of time than just one car purchase. And these are questions that become business questions. They're not technology questions, and these will be answered over time. As JJ said, I mean, in one side, what I say about Google from the autonomous side, well, I actually say, I start by saying without DARPA, we wouldn't be sitting here, right? Because of the Grand Challenge. And then without Stanford winning and CMU winning, Google wouldn't be having this, because they just bought, they just took that technology and continued with it. But that actually drove the industry to get, off what and start working on it. And I think this will be a good interaction. The one interesting thing about privacy and about data and it's like, what about Google? I mean, everybody's like, oh, what are you going to do with your car? And everybody is like, Google already knows where you are every moment of the day. I would be less worried about the car companies than I'm worried about Google. So this to me is an interesting, play.
Thanks, Joe. Karen?
I'd like to thank our speakers for sharing their views. We appreciate you sharing your views so candidly. Thank you. And Jaime, you were a marvelous moderator. Thank you.
My pleasure. It's very fun.
Would like to thank Bloomberg again. And by the way, there are copies of the brand new Bloomberg Business Week out as you leave. And on page 20, there is an article about the Tesla-Toyota partnership that you will find of interest. I would like to thank NVIDIA and Tracy of Airfoil. And also, hopefully tomorrow, but might be the next day, just depending. We should have this video up on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Churchill Club. So check it out and let people know about it. And you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. See you next time.